We're down in the beautiful South Devon town of Dartmouth today because Williams Jet Tenders is about to celebrate its 20th anniversary, and to mark the occasion it's launching 3 new models. That's the Sportjet 460, the Sportjet 520 and the Dieseljet 625. And we're lucky enough to have been given the opportunity to test all 3 of those boats a full 2 months before their official launch at the September boat shows. Well, the first boat I'm on here today is the Dieseljet 625. Now, that's the largest diesel jet in the fleet, and I've just had a little drive. It's actually a bit of a beast, diesel powered though it might be. Let's start at the back end though, take a look at the basic layout, because this boat, alongside the next 2 largest in the Dieseljet fleet, well, they're available with solar certification, in which case you get a lot of high-vis markings amidships and up at the bow. You also get a stretcher that goes across in front of the helm position there. And if we look towards the back end, well, what we got here, built into the back end of this bench, is a big cabinet, and that is your self-righting mechanism. It means if you turn the boat over in rough seas, there'll be a little pin in a very easy to reach position just here that you can pull, and then the boat will right itself so you can get back underway. In the absence of this unit here for self-righting the boat, what we would have is a larger swim platform for water sports and so on. And even with this in position, we do have the option of a ski pole here for water sports. And as standard, we also have some very wide diameter tubes, because this is designed to carry up to 11 people, so buoyancy is a key element of it. In terms of the basic layout then, given that this boat is rated to carry 11 people, seating is a major strength, and it starts at the aft end with a 3-man bench, nice and deep set, opposite another 2-man bench facing aft. So that's quite a cosy little section. Built into the front of that unit, we've got a pair of helm seats, so 7 people seated aft of the helm. And up in the bow, well, this is where this boat, the 625, takes advantage of the extra space. We've got another 60 centimetres or so over the smaller model in the fleet, and that's used for this section on the port side. So we've got 2 seats in the front of the console, another couple in the bow, and an additional one on the port side. So all 11 people can sit in relative comfort, and because of the shallow hull angles, because of those big diameter tubes, stability, whether you're up on the plane or cruising along at displacement, is very pronounced indeed. The helm position is quite interesting too. It's not a huge unit, and obviously it's not going to be on a compact boat with fat diameter tubes, but if you move into the position, you'll see, as I say, we've got a 2-man helm seat with a nice little armrest on the port side there, and that's great, not just for your arm but also for your thigh and your hip, if you jam yourself against that when you're going through the turns and being a bit of a hooligan. That's a really useful asset, that. The seat itself is not adjustable, but we do have an adjustable wheel plus a foot brace down below, so the position is quite comfortable if you just shunt yourself forward on the bench a little, so that the touch points are all very naturally to hand. There's our kill cord down below the throttle, a little bit of basic switchgear here, 2 for lights, 1 for the horn and 1 for the bilge pump, and then a pair of 8 or 9 inch plotters on either side of this little drained storage locker. We've also got another little storage locker underneath here, and on the Solus equipped model we've also got a compass bang in the centre just below that screen. And as for the screen itself, well, it's not huge. It does give you a decent bit of protection around about the midriff, but you do get hit pretty much square in the face by the winds, because it can't afford to be too lofty. The principle being that in order to fit into a locker, well, this helm console hinges up and folds back down so that it sits flush with the level of the tops of these backrests. So given the space and size constraints that they're working with, it's actually a pretty effective solution. In any case, what we want to do with a jet boat is get it up and have a drive. Now, it's interesting because the only jet boats I've ever really driven were sort of 15, 20 years ago. They're kind of soap dish style jet boats where you could just throttle right on, swing the wheel over and execute a super fast 180 with lots of froth and nonsense, and then get back underway again and do the same. But this is fundamentally different to that, and we'll get underway and show you exactly why. It helps, of course, if you turn on the engines. So I'll just point us in a sensible direction, engage the throttle. You'll see already that the wheel only turns about, I'd say lock to lock is barely one spin of the wheel, so it's quite responsive in that regard. And once we get up and underway, well, the pickup is pretty fantastic. A little bit of bow lift, but not a lot, and we're already doing 30 knots, 35, right up to the top end of about 40 knots here, 41, 42. And at this speed, as I say, on some of the old style soap dish jet boats, you can spin it round and execute a 180. But here, because of those rails at the back end, there's a bit more in the way of grip than slip. So there's lots and lots of G-force, as you can see. And when it grips, you need to just ease off on the wheel so you don't get kicked out over the top and make a fool of yourself. But that's quite a cool thing, because rather than being a silly kid's toy, a bit of a hooligan sports machine, this somehow makes you drive it like a more grown-up boat. In all regards, it feels like a more grown-up boat. It feels quite heavyweight, and actually the spray deflection is also pretty good on this. I've heard people in the past talk about Williams as being relatively wet boats, and to a degree that's inevitable because of the space constraints and the weight constraints and the fact that they have to be relatively shallow hull boats in order to fit into the spaces they need to fit into. But we got some decent spray rails on here, a quite pronounced chine, and of course we got rubbing straights on the sides of the tubes that angle down and do a little bit of spray deflection as well. And of course if I put it into a beam wind, we do get a little bit of water ingress over the side, but in all honesty, as far as dryness goes, it's a very good performance. And in terms of the ride too, I'm particularly impressed with that moderate dead rise and those big tubes. It runs flat, and it runs flat very fast. You don't have to coax it onto the plane and try to dip that nose again. Right from the start, it runs pretty much as you would have it. And of course, given that it's a jet boat, you don't have any ability to play with the leg angle because there is no leg. So you can't lift that bow in the following seat. And unfortunately today, we don't have a following seat for me to have a play and see if I could just coax it into a bit of wetness and misbehaviour. Even so, given what I've experienced today, I'm particularly impressed with this boat. I wasn't expecting it to be quite so vigorous as one of the relatively heavyweight diesel models. And in spite of the fact you can't treat it like an old school hooligan's machine, I actually think it's all the better for it. Not least because of the helm position, which plants us bang in the middle of the boat. The pivot point is directly beneath us. There's still a little bit of slip, but there's just that extra bit of grip dialed in, and it makes it altogether a far more grown up and capable boat. We're on the Sportjet 460 now, and I'm standing up there in the bow. I'll just spin around and give you a sense of the perspective here, because several things have changed on this 460. This is a brand new model, won't actually be released until September at the traditional September boat shows. And one of the changes that's really key is up here in the bow. Now on the previous model you'd have had this bow seat extending further aft to generate plenty of internal storage, but it wasn't quite big enough to actually operate as a sun pad. So what they've done is shorten that up, create an extra bit of deck space here, shift the console a little way aft and generate an extra 2 seats here on the leading edge of the console. Now that's great in terms of the sociability up there in the bow, because you can happily sit 4 people there even if you're not using the tubes. But it's also good for boarding, because we have a boarding step on top of the tubes there on both sides, And if I lift up this cushion, you'll see we've got another step here. Now here's a point where you fit your bracket just so you can get a grab hold as you're stepping off or stepping back on board. And the fact that the boarding point is here means that if you're the skipper, you can sit back there at the helm and actually help people on and off without leaving the wheel. So that makes a tremendous amount of sense. Now if we move ourselves aft towards the helm station, you'll see there are additional changes here. Now as I say, the helm station itself has been moved aft to generate extra space for that new bow arrangement. That means that the engine box has also shifted aft alongside the bench seat, but the gap between the bench seat and the helm has actually narrowed a touch just to bring you further forward towards the wheel and throttle, and they've been re-engineered so the throttle is further aft, so you can just reach out and grab that without having to twist or lean forward when you're underway. And on a small boat that's pretty lively, very agile handling, that's particularly useful, because of course you do encounter the odd fairly significant impact and you don't want to be doubled over and hurting your back when you're doing that. In terms of what else the helm offers, well, we had analog dials before. Now we've got a nice digital display here. That's a 7-inch plotter and the engine display down there, plus some switch gear. And we also have a little trough for additional kit. Here's the ignition, there's the VHF, and down under here we have an additional little cubby hole which houses an extra key, as you'll see just here, and that is the learner key. And as you can see, what it basically does is limit the power available to your kids or someone who's perhaps not too confident with their driving, just so they don't get themselves into any trouble. Excellent feature that. We've seen that before on various personal watercraft in the past, so it's a proven kind of system. It's good to see it here. But there are additional changes too. If I spin around, on previous models, this backrest here took 2 men to operate, but here it should, in theory, it takes 2 hands to operate, so I'm borrowing a hand here from Ollie, good man. And if you pull that, this backrest comes straight over and opens up that sunbed, and you look at that and think, well, it looks relatively short, but actually I've had a lie on that and it's perfectly comfortable for a 6-footer, in fact for 2 6-footers, just to lie, to lounge and to enjoy themselves. And the rails either side certainly help in terms of security, and that's a really impressive feature on a boat that's only 4.6 metres in length. And if I jump over here towards the back, well, this is cool too. Now, one of the key features on the Sportjet line is not just the fact that they're a bit lighter and therefore a bit easier for high-low platforms, it's also the fact that they deliver that sociable seating, and we've seen that further forward. And this is another key element, a larger aft platform, a swim platform that's particularly useful if water sports are your thing. But here we have an additional feature, and I really like this very much. If I grab hold of this and pull that, out that comes, and that means I can sit on this aft-facing bench and stick my feet up there. That's really comfortable. I'd happily sit here underway, I have to say. And it also means that if you tend to stop the boat a little too quickly, as I frequently do, well, that splashback, that slosh that comes into the deck and soaks people's feet, well, this protects against exactly that. So it's a really worthwhile feature, that. As for the driving experience here, well, it's a bit of a treat. As you can hear from that engine note, it's a very different ball game from the Dieseljet. This, of course, is a petrol unit, a Rotex 170, and it certainly produces plenty of performance on a boat of this scale, and a boat in particular with a dead rise that's relatively shallow. It's a very efficient, quick planing boat, as I'll illustrate right now. Put the hammers down. After a little bit of bow lift, we're up on the plane and doing 35 odd knots. I'll just turn them back into the land so that we can avoid the worst of those winds. Oh, and it's a lovely boat to drive. It really is very, very responsive. I'm on the 625, carved, hard. I'd say there's just a little bit of extra slip bar in here. We still have those steel fins at the arm end of the hull, so there is a good bit of grip. And the pivot point again is just beneath us, but look at that, there's a little bit of slip too. And treated in the right way, that is an enormous amount of thrust. grip a little too much, but it is tremendous fun, and it does kind of encourage you to have a play. There's loads of boats, so water sports will be absolute child's play on a boat like this. And as on the 625, realistically, the amount of protection you get from the screen, well, it's not enormous, but of course, this console has to fold down exactly like that on the 625. It needs to go down so that this boat will fit into compact spaces on relatively modest motherships. So actually, in terms of the protection it affords you, it's very good indeed. Now let's have another little play, for no other reason than it is tremendous fun. Look at that, 30 knots already in a couple of seconds, 40 knots, and the top end wind is 170. Well, we're seeing 42, 43, 44 knots, and actually when we get a little bit of air, I've got to say, the ride is not too bad at all, 45, 46 knots there. I'll just ease her uppercuts and swing around to starboard. There we are, treat her with a bit more respect, and then if you really want to, instead of being a hooligan, you can just dip a tube, carve round the corner, keep her nice and stable, and avoid terrifying your passengers. Now I know that moderate dead rise is because they have to make sure that it'll fit in various tender garages, but actually, from a helmsman's perspective, it feels like a really well balanced and well sorted plane there. Well, we're on our third and final boat of the day now, and it's the Williams Sportjet 520. Now, we just come off the 460, and basically this is the same boat, save for a couple of key differences. So I'll point the camera back towards the bow and show you that. Now, this is the first key difference. We saw something similar on the Dieseljet 625. Basically, the extra 60 centimetres is used to generate this extra seat and extra seat box for additional storage there. If I spin myself around and look at the layout after this, it's all completely identical. But there are a couple of other minor differences. Well, I say minor, one of them's relatively minor. We've got the second MFD on here, and there's plenty of space for that. And the final difference is this. Now, this is the Rotax 230, exactly the same block as we saw on the previous boat, the Rotax 170. Difference here is we've got a supercharger and a big fluorescent number. Now, this is not a much bigger boat, and it's not a much heavier boat. The same hull, as I say, the same layout. So an extra 60 horsepower ought to make a phenomenal difference given how vigorous that 460 was. So what we'll do is close this back up, turn around and get this boat underway. We're at the helm of the 520 now, and as you would expect, everything looks pretty much the same. As I say, slightly longer bow, some pretty garish green on the tube tops. That's specifically for a customer, but of course you can have pretty much whatever colour you like. And an engine note that's comparable to my ear. What we'll do though is get her up and running and see how she does. Now we have that extra 60 horsepower and a bit of extra waterline length to play with. Oh, and the urgency of that. We're doing 40 knots already. That is supremely rapid. That mid-range urgency is just something else. I'll go easy in the turn, I'll come off the power a little bit, just to keep us in the boat. But actually, as I'm doing that, it's worth noting that on both sides of this bench seat, we've got little low-down mouldings plus these tubes, which means you can brace yourself good and hard against those in the turn for a bit of lateral support. And it also feels relatively deep set, which again helps with a sense of security. But it's just so much fun. We're doing about 2 miles an hour. It should be good for about 56 miles an hour if we're one up. Plus we've got 2 guys in the boat here today. Again, I'll come off the power a little bit just to execute the turn. Because it's not one of those old school boats that just slips. We do have to Again, splash deflection seems pretty good to me. And if I just ease her into these fairly moderate swells, only a foot maybe, power around again, there's just endless reserves of thrust. As anticipated then, this is a complete beast of a boat, far and away the quickest of the boats we have here today. And am I right in saying it's the largest of the Sportjet boats, isn't it, before you move up to the Dieseljet range? So it's precisely as it should be in that regard. You know, the Sportjet line is about lighter weight boats that are full of sociable seating, good for water sports, good for sport, that's why I called the Sportjet. So you want the flagship of the Sportjet line to feel like a proper plaything, and it absolutely does feel like that. It's time to go back to the mothership, but I've got time, I reckon, just for another little play. I'll get her up and running again. And I feel like to a degree now, I've learned how to operate this boat a little better. We don't just fire into a turn of pace. We just ease her into the turn, wait for that healing moment, and once you settle down, then you can kind of power on. And it's much, much more controllable. You can just feather the throttle, stay in control of wheel and throttle. Look at that, it's an absolute treat. Get back on the straight, all kinds of grunt. And though, as I say, with these jet boats, they don't have the ability to actively trip a leg because they don't possess the leg. But such is the grunt of tap from this boat that I feel pretty capable of shooting that bow up a little bit should I need to do so in a difficult sea. And certainly the agility suggests to me that picking your way through a seascape, if it gets a little bit lumpy, yeah, it might get wet, but it'd be very doable and it'd be a rude amount of fun. After 20 years of building boats, Williams Jet Tenders has become a really serious British success story, to the point where if I'm going around the world to various countries testing larger power boats and motor boats, they'll often define their tender garages or their high-low platforms in relation specifically to the model of Williams Jet Tender that will fit. The company now builds more than 1,100 boats per year from its Oxfordshire headquarters, and that makes it far and away the most prolific builder of boats in the whole of the UK. So these new models, they were never likely to be revolutionary. What we're expecting is evolutionary changes, and that is exactly what we've got. Either way, these boats are good to look at. They're very well built, they're considerately designed, and in spite of the fact that 98% of everything Williams builds goes directly into tender duties rather than standalone recreational applications, I have to say, get one out on the water and they are superb fun to drive.